Fantasy Rocket League. Fantasy Rocket League. If you have never played it, it's pretty fun. It definitely is a little bit different than traditional sports fantasy leagues, but it's a lot of fun. If you are a Rocket League esports fan, it's just going to improve your viewing experience. So I would definitely recommend you check it out. This is a website where you can build your team, you can build your own league, and they have introduced a couple of different new features. Snake Draft. The How to Play article will explain the basics of fantasy RLCS, things like positions, players, and availability, player availability, and regions. So we'll pop that up, and I'll check that in just a minute. All right. So Snake Draft, there's a set order draft with every league member. The first round of the draft will start with the first league member in the draft order. First pick will draft a player, and only that league member will have that player for the whole season, barring any trades or dropping the player from your roster. So the Snake Draft, if you have a league set up with a Snake Draft, a small group of friends, this is going to function more like traditional sports fantasy leagues that you may be familiar with. The next league member in the draft will pick from remaining players and so on until the last member in the draft order. You guys know how a Snake Draft functions. Round 1 goes 1 to 10. Round 2 goes 10 back to 1. Round 3, 1 through 10. And then round 4, 10 back to 1. So on and so forth. The players you draft for your fantasy team will remain on your fantasy team for the whole season unless you decide to trade or drop that player at any point. There will be a set number of players per roster. A roster will be composed of 8 players, 6 starters, 3 positions, 2 players per position, and 2 players on the bench to be used as substitutes. Your starting players will earn your team points each fantasy week. However, your bench players will not. You are able to pick up players that aren't on fantasy rosters in your league through something called the waiver wire. So if you drafted a player and they don't perform well, you can drop them from your team and pick up a different player on the waiver wire who is doing well to replace them. So although you have the potential to keep the same team all season, you can change up how that team looks throughout the season through trades with other league members and waiver wire pickups. The waiver wire is where all players, that's a tongue twister. Waiver wire is where all players not on league member rosters will reside. So pretty much just a huge pool of players that are not on teams. Head-to-head matchups. Each regional, you will be going head-to-head against another league member. The goal is to set the best possible starting lineup and outscore your opponent's team for that given week. Each fantasy week will be 2 weeks long. The duration of an open, a cup, or an invitational regional across all different regions. You can change your roster between your starters and bench players each fantasy week. Once a player's region starts their regional, that player will be locked and cannot be changed, whether they are on the bench or starting. Remember, players who are on your bench can accumulate points, but only the players in your starting roster will gain points for your team during each matchup. So this is just like your traditional sports fantasy football leagues, or your more traditional fantasy football leagues. Due to majors being such an exclusive event, league members will only use a starting roster of 3 players, 1 at each position. Before each major, teams will be able to select up to 3 keepers from their fantasy team. Keepers are players that are already on your fantasy team that are attending the major. The rest of the players attending the major that weren't selected as keepers will be put into the draft pool. All right, so if you have a team of 8 and there are 5 players on your team of 8 that make the major, you will select 3 and they will be called keepers. You keep those 3, and the other 2, it sounds as though they are going to be put into a draft pool. Teams that do not have a full team of 3 players, so let's say you only have 1 player that made the major on your fantasy team, will then take turns in a snake draft picking from the major player pool. After the major is over, all players or all teams will go back to their original state. Any players drafted through the major player pool will go back to their original team or to the waiver wire, depending on where they were prior to the major. Do players have bye weeks? No. You may have drafted a player, Monkey. You may draft a player that doesn't make the regional, like they don't qualify. They miss out on that regional. And so that would technically be a bye week because they won't be participating. And so obviously you would need to put one of your subs in or pick up someone from the waiver wire if you don't have anybody to play. But there are not really any bye weeks, no. Majors will feature a free-for-all matchup similar to how the Global Fantasy League is. Players will be fighting for the highest score with their 3 starting players. At the end of the major, league members will be placed in order from highest team score to lowest. Standings. Winning a regional matchup will grant you points, like in European football, as in RLCS points. Points in majors will heavily outweigh points from regional head-to-head matchups. Your team will gain 5 points from winning head-to-head matchups, while majors will allocate 15 points for winning. Majors will also allocate points to the rest of the teams in exponentially lower points based upon placement. These points, based on placement, will change depending on the size of the league. At the end of the season, the points your team accumulates will determine the playoff matchups. What's up, Chris of Spades? Player points. This should work like last season, if you are familiar with it. Basically, you have 3 positions that you can plug a player in. You have striker, midfielder, and defender, okay? And you just get positional modifiers or bonus or whatever, however you want to call it. So if your striker scores a goal, they're going to get, this is just an example, they're going to get 1.5x the normal goal score. So if a goal is 50 points for a player, that striker scoring might get 75 points. Whereas if your defender were to score, they would only get the standard 50. So that's how you place your players in their positions. You want to put the players that you think are going to do best defensively on defense, best offensively on offense, and midfielders are they get bonus points for assists. Snake Draft League Q&A. How does a draft work? A snake draft works where each team has 1 pick per round, and the picks go in a specific predetermined order. After a round is over, the following round is in the reverse order. Snake. We all know that. How many times will I need to draft? There is 1 draft, an all-encompassing draft will be at the beginning of the season. The players you draft will be on your team for the remainder of the season. What do I do with my team? Your team will consist of 8 players. You have 6 starters, 2 players for each of the 3 positions, and 4 players on the bench. I think that's supposed to be 2 players. Oh my goodness. What the? That is not what I'm clicking. Yeah. I'm messaging Dan to see if that's right, but I accidentally kept calling him on Discord. Is this making it more complicated than just picking the 6 players? Yes, absolutely. No, this is not replacing. This is a setting for you and your own private league. Is auction moving to EU? Potentially. What's up, Lime? How are you doing today? What if I have a player that doesn't make a regional? You will need to check your bench for a player that did make the regional. You can switch your players between starting lineup and bench no matter the region. Bang. All right, so snake draft. Something new, something fun. I am really excited about it.